whether or not Jesus was a man who came back from the dead and turned water into wine. You do not. No one does. It is impossible.
I know with as much certainty that he didn't do that
Okay,
as I know
though.
anything about the past.
How do you know anything? And let's take as a generic knowledge claim the letter A. How do I know A? What's the answer? Well, because of B. How do I know I'm sitting here while my eyes are telling me? How do I know my eyes are working properly? Well, I went to an eye doctor and he checked them up. He gave me a good, clean bill of health. So because of C. I know A because of B, because of C. How do I know C? Well, because of D. How do I know D? Because of E. You know where that ends? Not at the end of the alphabet. It doesn't end. It's an infinite regress. I know A because of B, because of C, because of D, on and on and on and on. So in order to know anything at all, you would have to have infinite knowledge. You would have to end that infinite regress. The only way to do that is with infinite knowledge. Who has infinite knowledge? I don't. You don't. Who has infinite knowledge? God has infinite knowledge. So in order to know anything at all, you would have to know everything, or have a revelation from somebody who does. That is the Christian worldview. I say, if you reject that, then you cannot justify even one knowledge claim.
We know the temperature. We know the ground is solid. We know there's a tree. We know that building's made of half concrete. I mean, okay, so, yeah, these are all little different truths. We can't argue that they are not truths. We just know they exist.
So to know truth, hang on, he's making some good points.
My thing is, though, I don't need to be born. I don't need to know God. I don't need any of that. No, well, hey, I am speaking.
Right.
I don't need to know any of that to...
Can I show you why you do?
No. I mean, you
can I show you why you do?
You can try, but you won't.
Okay, so in order to know things, you're employing your sense and your reasoning, right? You said, I know there's a tree there. I know the ground is solid. I know these things to be self-evident true. You're employing your sense and your reasoning, correct?
Yes.
How do you know your sense and reasoning are valid?
The same way you...
Hang on.
Because they are valid.
Okay, would you agree that there's people on this earth who have invalid senses and reasoning?
Yes.
How would they know if they're invalid?
Well, after a while, they find out, they take the colorblind test, and they're like, oh,
so they would need valid reasoning to find out that their reasoning is invalid.
Sorry, what?
They would need valid reasoning to find out that their reasoning is invalid. If there's people who have invalid reasoning, how do you know you're not one of those people?
Because
his reason is valid, because
they are given truth. There are things we all agree on as humans. Pretty much we all agree on them.
Truth is by consensus? Yeah. So if everybody agreed that God exists, it would make it true that God exists? If everybody agreed that the moon was made of green cheese, the moon would be made of green cheese?
Yeah.
Only the Bible provides what we call the preconditions for the intelligibility of man's experience and reasoning. And that's your technical jargon for the day. Man's experience and reasoning. In order for our reasoning, our thoughts to make sense, in order for our experiences in the universe to be intelligible, to make sense, certain things would have to already be true, and those are what we call those preconditions, the preconditions of intelligibility. And what are some of those things? Well, laws of logic. In order for us to think properly, there would have to already be in existence laws of logic. In order for us to do science, there would already have to be certain things in place. You already believe that your senses are reliable when you do science. That's a precondition of intelligibility. And so my argument for biblical creation, and for that matter, for any portion of the Bible, for the Bible as a worldview, is that it must be true, because if it were not true, you couldn't prove that anything is true. Only the Bible provides those preconditions of intelligibility, and I'm going to spell that out in the rest of the presentation here. There are certain things we rely upon in order to know anything. We rely upon laws of logic, for example, to make thinking possible. We rely upon a certain degree of orderliness in nature, which we'll call uniformity, or absolute morality, by which we make ethical judgments and we know what is right and wrong. In order for us to have those things, the Bible would have to be true, because those things are all contingent upon God as revealed in the Scriptures. I mean, let's take them one by one here. What about morality? Why would we have absolute morality in an evolutionary universe? If we're just animals, well, animals do what they want. They're amoral. They don't have a moral code. If we're just animals, why would we have an absolute moral code? It doesn't even make sense. Why ought we behave in a certain way? Why should we behave in a certain way? Those kind of words don't even make sense in an evolutionary universe. On the other hand, they make sense in a biblical creation worldview. And because God made us and made us in His image, we're responsible to God for our actions. Absolute morality makes sense in a biblical worldview. What about laws of logic? Laws of logic are the correct standard of reasoning. Why would there be a standard of reasoning in a chance universe where everybody just has different kinds of thoughts? Who's to say whose is right and whose are wrong? Right? That's just, it doesn't make sense. But laws of logic make sense in a Christian worldview because they reflect God's thinking. We have a standard of correct thinking because we have the biblical God. God is our correct standard for everything. Why would there be uniformity in nature? Well, because God upholds the universe in a consistent, law-like fashion. He does that for our benefit, and he's promised us that there will be a certain degree of uniformity in the future as there has been in the past. Now, my point here is not that evolutionists don't believe in these things, because they do. Evolutionists do believe in laws of logic, uniformity, and morality. But those things do not make sense in an evolutionary universe. So they're relying upon something that, on their own worldview, would have no rational foundation. It would have no good reason, no justification on their worldview. And so, because when you present this argument, a lot of times the evolutionists will say, well, wait a minute, I don't even believe the Bible, and I can use laws of logic. I say, I know, but the fact is, if your worldview were true, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be able to use laws of logic, because those don't make sense, given your worldview.
Every point of view contrary to Christianity is impossible, because it doesn't make sense out of human experience or belief. It cannot make intelligible anything in human experience. Where is the philosopher who, following non-Christian standards, can make sense out of anything, can make sense out of rationality, can make sense out of morality, can make sense out of self-awareness, can make sense out of science, can make sense out of human dignity? Where is the philosophy that does this? It doesn't exist. For God has made foolish the wisdom of this world. Do you believe that? You can take their antagonism and their hostility and what they say against Christianity and show that even that couldn't make sense unless Christianity were true in the first place. That the worldview of Christianity is necessary to make sense even of the arguments of those who oppose it. One of the things you're going to hear people say is, oh no, that's not, I can make sense out of I'm scientific, I'm rational, I'm a good person. And to that you want to say, yes, you are. Because you live in God's universe and you know God in your heart of hearts. And so you don't live up to your philosophy. What you want to be aware of and what you want to get across to the unbeliever is that he or she has deceived themselves about reality and how we know and how we should live.
And so what we're going to do is an internal critique showing that he's relying upon principles that are actually contingent upon the biblical God. His worldview is inconsistent. It blows itself up. And just to illustrate this, on the surface it may seem like we have two competing worldviews. We've got the biblical worldview and the secular worldview. Take your pick. You like the Bible, you like naturalism. You like blue, you like flame color. But we're going to find when we examine these up close, when we open up the hood, as it were, the biblical worldview makes sense. It's going to go somewhere. It's going to lead to knowledge. The secular worldview, when we examine it, it's not going to rationally work. It's not going to go anywhere. It cannot lead to knowledge. And I want to give you some quick examples of this before we go in a little more depth. Relativism. Want me to disprove relativism here? It's not hard. Relativism is the belief that all things are relative. There are no absolutes. And you'll hear people who are relativists say things like, well, that's your truth, but it's not my truth, and so on and so forth, which is really just a dumb thing to say, isn't it? Because truth is truth, and it's not subjective. Truth is objective. But the relativist will say there are no absolutes. And of course, the question you want to ask is, are you absolutely certain? Yeah. You see, the statement, there are no absolutes, is an absolute statement. So if it's true, it's false. Therefore, it's false. Easy to refute relativism. What about empiricism? I mentioned to you earlier that many evolutionists are empiricists. They believe that all truth claims are answered by empirical observation, sometimes supplemented with the need for logical consistency. Now, I believe in empirical methods. I believe that some truth claims are answered empirically. I believe in the methods of science, but not all truth claims are answered empirically. You couldn't answer the question of life after death empirically. I take that on the authority of Scripture that there's life after death. But the empiricist says, oh no, if you can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, whatever, it's not real. It's not truth. And so you must eventually ask the empiricist, how do you know the statement itself is true? How do you know that all truth claims are proved by empirical observation? Did you prove that by empirical observation? No. You can't observe truth claims, right? That doesn't even make sense. You can't see a truth claim. It's abstract. And so the notion that all truth claims are proved by empirical observation cannot be proved by empirical observation, therefore ought to be rejected on its own standard. See, empiricism refutes itself, just like relativism. Secular worldviews blow themselves up. All you have to do is light the match and let it go. It will circle back around and destroy itself. It's always the case. By the way, the biblical worldview is the only worldview that won't do that. The biblical worldview is the only one that when you apply it to itself, it's self-consistent. It doesn't blow itself up. All secular worldviews do. So at first it may seem like we're on our own little island over there on biblical presuppositions, and my secular friend is over on his own little island over there, secular presuppositions. At first it may seem like we have no common ground. There's no neutral ground. We've already established that. But you see, the point is, secular presuppositions are sinking sand. They will not support a cogent worldview. Only the Bible can do that. Only the Bible is the rock upon which we all must stand. And so when that sand dissolves away, the unbeliever is left standing on nothing. Well, Dr. Lyle, are you saying that all non-Christian worldviews are irrational? Yes. All non-Christian worldviews are ultimately irrational. Now, they may have pockets of rationality within them. Nobody is, there might be some people that are just totally insane, but for the most part, people have degrees of rationality. But ultimately, they can't support their own notions, you see. And so what is this unbeliever going to do? He can't stand on his own worldview, so he's going to do this. Unbelievers will stand on Christian presuppositions when it suits them, because they have to. They couldn't get anywhere without these Christian presuppositions, like laws of logic. Unbelievers do accept and use laws of logic, and in doing so, they're standing on Christian ground. And they're able to do this, by the way, because they do know in their heart of hearts the biblical God. God has hardwired into all of us knowledge of His law, His moral law, laws of logic, and so on and so forth. And we're able to do that. We're able to reason because God has planted that within us. But the point is, the unbeliever is standing on Christian ground and then denying Christianity. He's in self-denial. And when we point this out to him, when we point out he's in self-denial, his first response will be to deny that he's in self-denial. He'll say, oh no, laws of logic are not a Christian presupposition. They are secular or maybe neutral. He says, after all, I believe in laws of logic. I don't even believe in the Bible. But of course, that's not a good argument. I'm pointing out that if the Bible were not true, there'd be no basis for laws of logic. So what we want to do is point out his inconsistency. We want to point out that he is standing on Christian ground. He's standing on God's ground. He either needs to get saved or stop trespassing. And, get your own laws of logic. Stop borrowing God's. And we pray he'll be saved, but that's between him and God. We're just going to point out the inconsistency. And I want to give you another example to illustrate this. A debate over biblical creation is a lot like a debate on the existence of air. Can you imagine two people arguing whether or not air exists? What would the critic of air say? Can you imagine this person making this eloquent argument that air does not exist, all the while breathing air, and expecting that we can hear his arguments as they're transmitted through the air? That'd be kind of strange, wouldn't it? You see, the critic of air must use air in order to make a case against air. The fact that he's able to argue at all proves that he is wrong. Likewise, the critic of the Bible must use biblical presuppositions in order to argue against the Bible. The fact that he's able to make an argument at all proves that he's wrong. Because you see, the secularist is standing on Christian ground using God's laws of logic to try and argue against the Christian position. Now, that is not going to work, is it? His position is self-refuting. And so to illustrate this, I'd like to zoom in on a few of these preconditions of intelligibility, laws of logic, uniformity of nature, absolute morality. We'll probably have time to do two this morning. Let's start with absolute morality. I think this is the easiest to understand. It's a good one to start with if you're new to this way of apologetics. If God created us, He has the right to set the rules. Otherwise, why not make our own rules? Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? In the Christian worldview, God is good and is the standard of goodness. But if it's just, if we're just rearranged pond scum, why not do what you want?
You're appealing to a universe that's uniform and that can be studied and investigated, and yet you told me that you believe you're just stardust, there's no sovereign governance of the universe, so how are you making an appeal to uniformity when you don't know that the next 10 seconds will be like the past? Because you have no certainty that the next 10 minutes, next 20 minutes will be like the past.
In all probability, the same physical laws that govern the last 10 seconds will govern
so
the next 10
it's a gamble,
seconds.
really. You don't know that it will be.
Yes. Actually, it would be great.
And you believe that it gives you a solid foundation for science, that the future is a gamble?
No, it's not a gamble.
Because as a Christian, I believe, I have a justification that satisfies the preconditions of intelligibility for the uniformity in nature.
Let me tell you what this Christianity is, besides being a doomsday fertility cult.
Well, that's okay, though, because I'm stardust.
You are...
You're stardust.
Yeah.
So doomsday cults and arrogance and nastiness really is meaningless, though, isn't it, ultimately?
Oh, so now you're going to tell me after poking at me long enough, you've decided I'm arrogant.
No. He's arrogant. He's arrogant, not you. He is. You were bothered by his arrogance. I'm saying, but he's stardust.
No, I'm bothered by the fact that I'm a homosexual and have been being oppressed by jerks like that for as far back as I can remember. So I get very angry.
I would want you to know you're not going to get that kind of treatment from me. I'm going to love you. But just with that as a question, but if you were stardust, why would it matter that someone's oppressing you? Why would it matter that stardust is bumping into stardust? Who cares? You see, what I think you're showing is this. I think you're showing that deep within you, you know you have the image of God that stands. You have value and worth, and it is wrong for a man to oppress you and be nasty to you. That is wrong. I agree with you. But see, I have a basis as a Christian to say that's wrong. You believe you're stardust.
I believe I'm stardust.
So what's wrong with stardust oppressing stardust?
You're making questions out of...
But that's what you said you believe you are. And I don't believe that about you. I refuse to accept what you say about yourself.
After all these years of evolution...
That's a presupposition. But you believe ultimately that you are just matter. ultimately stardust.
Yes.
Okay.
So you would say that non-material things do not exist.
Non-material things do not exist.
So what are you?
So you're getting about this
laws of logic.
The severable soul
Ready?
thing.
Laws of
We're not talking
logic.
about souls. We're not talking about souls.
Laws of logic. Are they material?
They're a program running on the human mind.
So it's happening in your brain right now.
There is a bunch of chemical reactions.
So you're not even thinking right now. You're just fizzing.
I'm a state machine.
Okay, so you can't help but think the thought you are because your brain is just functioning that way. You're fizzing atheistically. I'm fizzing Christian theistically.
And you're fizzing because the religions.
But I don't have to listen to you right now though because you're fizzing. Do chemical processes produce truth?
Yes,
they do. Show me a chemical process.
They don't produce truth, but they can certainly analyze it.
Let me ask you this: is truth matter? Is truth material?
It's a state.
Okay.
It's a state.
A state of the mind machine.
Is there absolute truth?
There's a whole bunch of them, I would imagine.
So there's no absolute truth. So we could have.
I think he said he does believe in absolute truth. You do believe in absolute truth?
Well, as long as we're going to define that as something rational.
Okay, well then now we're on an important point. Rationality. Rationality would depend on laws of logic, being universal, unchanging, and necessary, correct? In other words, rationality doesn't just exist in your mind. It has to also be something that I'm holding to, and someone in Iceland.
Well, I would like to hold you to it, but I was about to say, religion has acted on the gene pool to make people more and more susceptible.
They're just fizzing, though. It's stardust fizzing. Why are you bothered as one bit of stardust that's fizzing? Why are you bothered about what other bags of stardust are fizzing? You said it's chemical reactions happening in the brain. You said you're stardust. Why are you worried about what's stardust? See, I think, Wayne, you're showing that you have the image of God all over you because you're living like a Christian but denying God's existence.
Because there is no evidence of God.
Again,
I can tell what he is because I look in all the history books. I can see the evolution of the belief.
Well, I've already shown you that I reject that claim. And if you would study the actual sources yourself, you wouldn't make any connection between the story in the Bible of the one and only true and living, self-existing God who enters into his own creation to rescue the rebels. There is nothing in history that's parallel to that. Nothing in history. And so what I would show you, what I would encourage you to see,
Osiris, virgin birth.
Right. No, all I would say to you is study the original Osiris and don't depend on what someone else tells you it says. Read it yourself and see if you can find parallels between the virgin birth of Christ that's predicted in Genesis and in Isaiah, hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus comes, between a woman having a virgin birth and then a woman getting pregnant and giving birth to an elephant. Tell me if that's a virgin birth narrative. It's just not, Wayne. And I would just say this to you.
But that's not the same story that I'm trying to compare.
We can wrap this up with just this. I know you're here for this rally. My contention, respectfully to you, is this, and I mean this with love, Wayne, is that you're not just stardust, and you know it. I
do not know that.
You know that there's more, that you're living as though you believe there is. You say you're stardust, but you're complaining about people hurting you. You're complaining about...
And hurting everyone else.
They're stardust.
And dragging humanity back into the primordial ooze.
When you elevate stardust above other matter, you're internally inconsistent. What's this arbitrary decree you've made that this stardust is more important than this?
That's not a state machine.
But the point is what you're saying then is if it fizzes better, it's more important? So if you get a bag of stardust that fizzes better than you, can he off you?
I'm sure he will.
Okay, but would that be a good thing and a healthy thing you'd want him to do?
As long as it didn't hurt.
So he can kill you as long as it doesn't hurt you.
Well,
I thought you were complaining a little bit ago about people oppressing you because you're homosexual.
Yeah, it gets tiresome.
But why would it bother you? It's just stardust doing what stardust does in these conditions.
Well, because if they got control of the building on the other end of the mall here, that kind of person would put me in a concentration camp. But do you realize that Mormons are still using shock treatment on their kids when they find out that they're gay?
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff that you don't know.
But Mormonism is a big aspect of our ministry. We reach out to them a lot. But using your foundations, though, Wayne, I just don't understand why you care what Mormons are doing.
I don't see a difference between
my foundations. I have a justification for logic, science, and morality.
They would claim the same thing.
But your they borrow from the Bible then to distort its message. It's internally inconsistent. And I would argue the same about you. I mean that lovingly, of course, that you're internally inconsistent because you act like you're valuable, and I believe you are, by the way, Wayne, you certainly are. But yet you say out of your mouth, I'm stardust, the universe is unguided, and all these things, but then you stand on the same worldview I ultimately am, that you have value and dignity and meaning, that there's laws of logic that we must all hold to. But you see, in your worldview, Wayne, you shouldn't need to. You're stardust. Here's a collective bag of meaty protoplasm right here, all gathering to talk about reason, and and Dan Barker agrees with you, by the way, I interviewed him this week, that ultimately laws of logic is just what your brain's doing. So here you have chemical processes fizzing. Who cares? Who cares? There's no truth being produced here, and they're not.
Sure, there is.
And ultimately, if you believe what they say about yourself, then you don't have any value or meaning or dignity. And I refuse to believe that about you, Wayne. I believe you do have value and dignity and meaning, and I believe that you show deep down that you know them. Because you're living like
Absolutely
a Christian.
Not.
Okay. I would ask you...
Actually, in a way, that's insulting, because in a lot of ways, if you just look at the essential right and wrong, the golden rule...
What's right and what's wrong with Stardust?
Then I behave a hell of a lot better than a lot of Christians out there.
On a scale, and I'm hearing you, on a scale, here you're calling this better, but you've got two values. Love people, treat them well, hate people, kill them. Why are you choosing one over the other as moral, as Stardust? Why have you arbitrarily chosen this is better over genocide? Why isn't genocide the happy, healthy thing to do?
Is it the only way that humanity can go ahead?
But who cares about humanity? Who cares about Stardust producing more Stardust?
It's a complete waste for all this stuff that has happened, all the little rolls of the dice that have led us to where we're at today.
Stardust.
And humanity is going to destroy itself and much everything else on the cool little planet that we're on.
So it doesn't really matter ultimately, does it?
Ultimately, everything adds up to zero, don't you know that?
Right, see, and that is how you're not living, though. You're not living like everything ultimately adds up to zero. You're living as though there's meaning and truth and goodness and beauty, and I agree with you. But what I'm saying is it shows that you know them. You know them.
Absolutely not.
Well, but what I'm saying is I'll believe that about you when you stop living according to his revelation. You're living like science and reason and ethics is important, and then you're denying it with your profession of faith and atheism.
Now, some people might say that's right. Morality is relative. You can make up your own rules, and so can I, and therefore you can't go around telling other people what not to do. And the moment they say you can't tell other people what not to do, what are they doing? Telling other people what not to do. Okay, so relative morality is pretty well self-refuting just right there. It doesn't make sense. And nobody really believes in relative morality. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to ask an evolutionist or anyone who's rejected biblical authority, how do you decide right from wrong? Because apart from the biblical God, morality can only be relative, but people cannot live that way. And people know in their heart of hearts that morality is not relative. Now, some people will say, oh, come on, Dr. Lyle, everybody knows right from wrong. To which I would respond, yeah, that's because God has revealed himself to human beings, and so in our conscience we know right from wrong. But my point is, in an evolutionary worldview, why would there be such a thing as right and wrong, and how could you possibly know about it? Say everybody knows is not answering the question. Now I want to give you some possible responses to this. Not that there are any good responses, but that's the point. I want to show you that the best responses to this are not rational. Some people might say, oh, you don't need God to determine right and wrong, because morality is what brings the most happiness to the most people. That's a pretty common response from the atheist camp, though it's not universally their response. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, that's right. We ought to be concerned about the happiness of others. To which I would say, yes, in the Christian worldview. Right? That's the golden rule. We're to do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. So even here, he's borrowed on the Christian worldview a little bit to support his own. But my point is, in an evolutionary universe, why should I be concerned about the happiness of others? If they're just rearranged pawn scum, why should I be concerned about their happiness? Right? Happiness is just a chemical reaction in the brain if you're an evolutionist, so why should I try to achieve that particular chemical reaction and not another, like, say, pain? Maybe what's good is what brings the most pain to the most people. Right? I mean, this is totally arbitrary and totally impractical, too. How could you possibly measure this? I mean, how do you know what brings the most happiness to the most people? Do we have little meters on our arm telling us how happy we are? Can I point my tricorder at you and say, oh, you're this 50 levels of happiness or whatever? That's not going to work. Marquis de Sade enjoyed torturing women. Now, maybe the pleasure he got in torturing women outweighed the pain of the women that he tortured. And so that would be good under this definition. And so you say, well, yeah, that's not going to work. That's not a tenable position. Well, the moral code is simply electrical impulses in the brain. I was debating a PhD neurologist, and this was his answer. And he was a very smart man. I couldn't believe that he gave this ridiculous answer. Because if it's just a section of your brain, if it's just electrical impulses in the brain, why should I follow it? Right? I have other impulses in my brain too. I don't follow all of my impulses, and that's probably a good thing, right? Because sometimes I'm inclined to do things that maybe are not good. This would not be morality if it's just impulses in the brain. It's not universal laws, and my brain's different than yours anyway. I have different impulses, and so what's good for me would be different than what's good for you. And you can't have objective morality that way. Laws of morality are conventions adopted for the benefit of society. There's something, we all agree to them, and so, because we need these laws to maintain society. Why? That's arbitrary. Well, because without that, we'd have disorder. So, it's an evolutionary universe. Well, but Dr. Lyle, we need these laws to prevent us from acting, what, like animals? Is that what you want to say? But in the evolutionary worldview, that's all we are, right? And by the way, if they're conventional, then different cultures could adopt different laws of morality, right? And so you could have different moral codes in different cultures. Now, there have been cultures, in a sense, that have tried this. Hitler thought that it would benefit his society to kill Jews, but I don't think that any of us would say that that is really good. You couldn't say that society is evil if this was the definition of morality, because every society would have its different moral code. So they're not laws if they're just conventions. And by the way, the word benefit assumes a standard of goodness anyway. Who's to say what's good unless you already have a standard of goodness? So it's a bit circular as well. People can adopt their own moral codes. I had one reporter tell me when he was a secular reporter and he was interviewing me. And I said, sure, but if you can, so can I. And you might not like some of the things that I want to do. Maybe I want to shoot you. He got the point. He got the point. He realized that you can't have universal, objective moral laws if they're just something that people invent. And just to drill this home, consider an evolutionist who is outraged at seeing a violent murder on television. He says, how could that man shoot that little girl? That's terrible. He ought to go to jail. But he's an evolutionist. Why should he be angry? Ever think, I mean, in his worldview, it's just one chemical accident getting rid of another chemical accident. What's the problem? You wouldn't get angry at baking soda for reacting with vinegar. That's just what chemicals do, right? And by the way, chemicals don't have a choice. So if the person that shot the little girl, if he's just a chemical accident, he doesn't have any, just the outworking of chemistry, why would you punish him? You wouldn't punish baking soda for reacting with vinegar. It's just what it does. You wouldn't throw the lion in jail for killing the antelope, right? Animals kill animals. What's the big deal? And so the fact that he is angry is a behavioral inconsistency. That's something I'm going to talk about in a later session. It shows that in his heart of hearts, he does know the biblical God. He does know that murder is wrong. Let's move on and talk about laws of logic. These are a reflection of the way God thinks and the way he expects us to think. Now here's where the critic will say, oh, but Dr. Lau, how do you know how God thinks? And the answer is, God has revealed himself. He's revealed some of his thoughts in his word. I don't know all of God's thoughts, but I know some of them because he's revealed them in his word. And that's why it's got to be the biblical God and not some God of our own invention. Laws of logic stem from God's nature. And we're made in God's image, and so we instinctively know these laws of logic. We act on them, like the law of non-contradiction. Now, you all, even if you have never heard of the term before, you immediately know that that's true, that contradictions, two contradictory statements cannot both be true. If I told you my car is in the parking lot and it's not in the parking lot, you wouldn't rush out to say, oh yeah, I want to see a car that's there and not there. You would immediately assume that what I told you is false, and you'd be right to do that, because that's a law of logic that cannot be violated. But where does that law come from? Why is there a law of non-contradiction? Ever thought about that? Why is it that two contradictory statements cannot both be true? Most people haven't thought about that, but it stems from God's nature. It's because God doesn't deny himself. The Bible tells us, 2 Timothy 2:13, he cannot deny himself. He cannot contradict himself. And all truth is in God, therefore truth will not contradict itself, you see. And again, this is why it has to be the biblical God. It can't be the God of the Quran, for example, because Allah does contradict himself. The Quran endorses the gospel of Jesus and then contradicts the gospel of Jesus by saying that Jesus was not crucified and is not the Son of God. So you see, it has to be the biblical God, the God who cannot deny himself according to the scriptures. What are laws of logic anyway? Ever thought about that? A little bit abstract, isn't it? Can you touch a law of logic? Can you accidentally swallow one? No, because they're immaterial. They're not made up of atoms. They don't have a location in space. You can't pull a law of logic out of the refrigerator. They are universal, meaning they apply everywhere. It's not like laws of logic apply in the United States, but not in Europe. There, anything goes. Okay, there you can contradict yourself. No, they're universal. They apply everywhere. They are invariant, meaning they don't change with time. The laws of logic, it's not like they apply on Monday, but not on Fridays. They apply all the time. They're invariant, and they're abstract because they deal with concepts. So laws of logic are immaterial, universal, invariant, abstract entities which govern all possible conceptual relationships. They describe how concepts relate to each other. And if you think about it, laws of logic are contingent upon the biblical God. The biblical God can account for all of these properties. God's thoughts would necessarily be immaterial. God is an immaterial being. He's spirit. God's thoughts would be universal because God is omnipresent. His thoughts uphold the entire universe, and therefore contradictions can't happen anywhere, for example. God's thinking would be invariant because God himself does not change with time, and therefore his thoughts do not either. And they would be abstract because all thoughts are abstract. All thoughts are conceptual. So you see, the biblical God can make sense of the fact that we have laws of logic, one correct standard of reasoning that all human beings must adhere to if we're going to be rational, if we're going to come to the truth. But other worldviews cannot account for laws of logic. Take naturalism, for example. And I mentioned earlier, many evolutionists are naturalists. They believe that nature is all that there is. The naturalist attempts to use logic and reason to support his position, but there's a problem. Logic is not part of nature, right? You can't point your telescope somewhere and see a law of logic. They're not natural. And they're immaterial. So if everything that exists is part of nature, is material, then you can't have laws of logic. And so the naturalist is trying to use something that cannot exist within his own position to support his own position and to argue against Christianity. The fact that he's able to make an argument at all proves that he's wrong. Now if he says, well, wait a minute, Dr. Lau, that can't be because you don't need to be a Christian to use laws of logic. After all, I use laws of logic and I don't even believe the Bible, so they can't be dependent upon the biblical God. But that would be no different than the critic of air saying, wait a minute, you don't need air to breathe. I don't even believe in air, and I can breathe just fine, right? That's not a rational argument, is it? I'm not saying you have to profess a belief in air to breathe, but you do need air to breathe. I'm not saying you have to profess a belief in God to use laws of logic, but you do need the biblical God to have laws of logic. No other worldview can account for that. What are some possible responses to this then? Well, some people might say laws of logic are material. They're chemical reactions in the brain. Well, if they're material, they're not laws. And they wouldn't be universal because they wouldn't extend beyond your skull if they're just in your brain. And we wouldn't have the same laws of logic between any two people because we all have different chemical reactions in our brain. So that one doesn't make sense. And some people might say, okay, well, they're not material, but they're descriptions of material things. They're descriptions of how the brain thinks. But if laws of logic were simply descriptions of how the brain thinks, why would we need laws of logic to correct the way the brain thinks, right? I mean, you don't always think logically, but if laws of logic were just a description of how you think, you could never violate one because you always think the way that you think. Yes? Now, we don't always think as God thinks, and that's our problem. That's why we're being irrational. Laws of logic are conventions that we all agree to them and so they work, like driving on the right side of the road. Oh, but some cultures you drive on the left side of the road. So if laws of logic were conventional, different cultures could adopt different laws of logic. Welcome to Australia. Here, contradictions are true, right? It's not going to work, is it? Laws of logic are universal, and therefore they can't be conventions. They're a property of the universe, Dr. Lyle. They're just a property of the universe. That's the way the universe is. It's not much of an answer, really, but if they were a property of the universe, well, the universe changes with time, and so we'd expect laws of logic would change. They wouldn't be invariant. And the universe is different in different places. We'd expect different parts of the universe would have different laws of logic. Laws of logic aren't even describing the universe anyway. They're describing concepts, abstract concepts, and so it doesn't make sense for them to be a property of the universe. One person told me this. He says, well, we use them because they work. And I said, I know, but that's not my question. My question is, how can you account for them in an evolutionary worldview? I know they work. They work because they're true, but why are they true? Why are there these universal, invariant, abstract entities that we call laws of logic? I can account for that as a Christian, but my secular colleagues cannot. They're having to use something that does not make sense in their own position to support their own position.
I now write to you this second epistle, in both of which I stir up your pure minds by way of reminder that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior, knowing this, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and of the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But the heaven and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So the Apostle Peter is reminding his readers here, or his listeners, to remember the words of the Old Testament prophets, okay? Then he goes into a very specific prophecy that when the end times come, that there will be mockers scoffing about the end times. In other words, when they hear teachings like this, when they hear teachings about the end times, they will scoff according to their own lust. In other words, these are not godly people, these are immoral people. And they mock, saying, nothing has ever changed. Everything is as it was since the beginning. And Peter then says, of course, that's been fulfilled. We know that that's true. And Peter then says they willfully reject the authority of the Word of God and the warnings concerning their judgment. Listen, they willfully reject it.
If you believe in preposterous notions, like there's a guy who came back to life, he turns water into wine, he walks on water. If you believe that, you're not intelligent. You're just not.
Well,
I don't believe you're intelligent. I think you are intelligent in individual disciplines, but obviously if you believe something that makes no sense whatsoever, you believe that someone was magic, someone defied physics, someone had superpowers, someone was a person who could bring people back to life, someone could come back to life themselves. There's no evidence that anybody like that has ever existed.
You believe this on the flimsiest evidence that wasn't even written down until 70 or 80 years after that dude died, because Christianity didn't even. So I'm with you. I mean, I'm an atheist,
even worse than that, because the Old Testament is far older than even the notion of Jesus.
We may be moved and induced by the testimony of the church to an high and reverent esteem of Holy Scripture and the heavenliness of the matter, the efficacy of the doctrine, the majesty of the style, the consent of all the parts, the scope of the whole, which is to give all glory to God, the full discovery it makes of the only way of man's salvation, the many other incomparable excellencies, and the entire perfection thereof are arguments whereby it doth abundantly evidence itself to be the Word of God. Yet, notwithstanding our full persuasion and assurance of the infallible truth and the divine authority thereof is from the inward work of the Holy Spirit, bearing witness by and with the Word in our hearts. There are many persons who believe that chapter 1 is the greatest chapter in what may be the greatest creed of all time, and section 5, which I have just read, is the greatest part of the greatest chapter of what may be the greatest creed of all time. You see what it's saying here? The testimony of the church and the unity of the evidence and the power that God works through it and so on is evidence that the Bible is the Word of God. It's absolutely irrefutable evidence. It's solid evidence. It's compelling evidence. But they hasten to say, what brings the persuasion is not the evidence, but the working of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. You see, there's a difference here between proof and persuasion. They're two different things. And the Westminster Divines are saying there is external, demonstrative, compelling proof that the 66 books of the canon are nothing less than the inspired and infallible Word of God. But in spite of the fact that the evidence is overwhelming, and it does abundantly evidence the Bible to be the Word of God, Westminster is saying no one is persuaded by it unless the Spirit works along with it. The reason the proof does not persuade is not because it isn't compelling, but because we are sinners. Not because we don't see the light, but because we don't like the light. Quite analogous to the statement of Christ, this is the condemnation. Light is coming to the world, and men loved the darkness. He was referring to himself as the light of the world. And of course, this book we're studying, the Bible, is indeed what bears witness to him. So it's the light to the world, inscripturated, just as he is the light to the world incarnate. When he is saying the reason people don't believe in him is not because his evidence of being the divine Son of God is not utterly overwhelming and compelling, but because they don't like what he is. They don't like the light. They love the darkness. And so analogously here, the reason this is insufficient is not because of it, but because of us. And what is necessary for us to have persuasion is a work of another being because, as we'll see in chapter 9, for example, it's the Holy Spirit who changes our hearts.
When it comes to misconceptions about the New Testament, these are many, and people have all kinds of ideas in their head about what the New Testament is like and where it came from, and all kinds of misconceptions are out there. One I'll just mention to begin with is one we hear a lot, particularly in recent years with the writings of Bart Ehrman and others, which is this idea that the New Testament has been radically changed in its text over a number of years. People think that scribes have altered it so significantly that it's been corrupted and can't be recovered, and really we're at a loss to know what the New Testament authors really wrote. And this has confused a lot of people. That argument not only is popular in critical circles, it's also popular in the Muslim world, this idea that the New Testament can't be relied upon in terms of its transmission. There's all kinds of responses to that. I'll just mention one, and that is we have manuscripts that date back very early in the history of the church, all the way back to the 2nd century. In other words, we can get very close to the time period when the original manuscripts were written. We wish we had something from the 1st century, we wish we had the autographs, but we have manuscripts so close, there's just not enough time there to expect wholesale massive changes in the text. So even just the dating of our manuscripts gives us a good start in terms of textual reliability.
And it's worth adding to that, I think, that if you do comparisons with other ancient documents, Caesar's Gallic Wars, for example, written within a century more or less of when the New Testament documents were written, we have precisely 3 manuscripts that have come down from the Middle Ages for the Gallic Wars, as contrasted with about 5,000 manuscripts of whole or part of the Greek New Testament and about 8,000 manuscripts of early translations. The evidence is simply overwhelming and stunningly early to write things off so freely. It's more imagination than fact.
Yeah, and I would add to that too that people made comments that Christian scribes were not competent and they were often unable to be reliable in their transmission efforts. And some of you can argue that Christian scribes were illiterate and couldn't read. Those are overstated arguments. Actually, when we look into the early centuries, we see a very robust textual culture in the early Christian movement. We have good reasons to think the scribes were competent and capable. We can look at the handwriting of the manuscripts and see that they really did know their task and knew what they were doing. So when you consider what Don mentioned with the number of manuscripts and the date and sort of the scribal infrastructure of early Christianity, we really can't trust that we have the text that was originally written.
How do you account for the errors of the scribes when the New Testament was handed down person to person?
Yeah, excellent question. There are errors that we know about. Why? Because we can compare the documents, we can compare the manuscripts and see where the errors are. In fact, let me see if I can show you a representation of that, because it's better seen than it is described. Here it is. Let's say you have, here's the original, which we don't have. We don't, at least we don't think we have any original documents, okay? So they're all copies, okay? And let's say you find 4 different copies. And in the first copy, you see an error right here. And then another copy, there's another error right there. In the third copy, there's another error right there. And in the fourth copy, there's an error right there. Can you reconstruct the original?
Yes.
Yes. And that's what scholars do. The original, this happens to be Romans 3:26, God is just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Now the note here is the New Testament documents have far fewer variations than this example. So yes, sometimes scribe made mistakes, but in virtually all cases we know what the mistake was and we can correct it by comparing it with other documents. Now you might say, why wouldn't God just, if this is true, why wouldn't he just maintain the original? I'm speculating here, but I think one reason, well, 2 reasons. Number 1, if we had the original, we might venerate it. We tend to venerate things like that, right? But number 2, if I had the original, what could I do to it? I could alter it, right? But if you had a copy, 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 and I had a copy, and I changed my copy, is everyone going to know who changed their copy? Yeah, because when you get all your copies together and compare it to mine, you go, Turek, you heretic, why'd you do that? Right? So by not preserving the original, you actually are able to preserve the original better.
So what if the error is not that simple? Like, what if it's a difference in concept? So if we have these copies and say copy 1 gets 12 copies, copy 2 gets 24 copies, and then you've got copy 4 that gets 400 copies, but copy 4 is the incorrect copy, then how do we justify truth in that? As well as how do we justify the truth in Jesus' exact words when we didn't hear them ourselves?
Okay. There is no significant doctrine, theological doctrine, that is affected by any variant. And who admits this? Bart Ehrman himself. Okay? So Bart Ehrman, the great skeptic, admits that the New Testament documents are reliable. In fact, let me show you a quote from him, because this quote is very right on the money. You know, he wrote the book Misquoting Jesus. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but in 2005 he wrote a book called Misquoting Jesus, a popular book, in which he tries to insinuate that we can't trust what the New Testament documents have said. Yet, the very same year, 2005, he wrote an academic work. He updated an academic work with his mentor, Dr. Bruce Metzger from Princeton University. In fact, Metzger was the top manuscript scholar of the last century. And in that book, he agrees with Metzger that the New Testament documents are copied accurately. Now, why is he coming to 2 different conclusions the same year? Same evidence. The only thing I can speculate is when you say to the academic community something wrong, they'll correct you on it. But when you say something wrong to the lay community, they don't know any better in most cases. You can sell a lot of books when you say the New Testament documents aren't copied reliably. That gets you a review in the New York Times, that gets you on the Colbert Show, the Jon Stewart Show. You sell a lot of books. Right, what's that?
A textbook to be studied. We're studying Ehrman now.
You're studying Misquoting Jesus?
No, his textbook, the New Testament.
Okay, well that one that he co-wrote with Metzger is actually good. But this one, now here's what he says. This is in the appendix of the paperback version. So this comes out a year or 2 later from the original Misquoting Jesus. He's interviewed. And in the interview, here's what he says. Check this out. This is a quote from the book, page 252. He says, Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, and even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. What are they in agreement on? If he and I were put into a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Well, why would you write Misquoting Jesus then? Not you, but Bart Ehrman, right? The book maybe should be called Misquoting Ehrman, because he doesn't even agree with himself. So it seems that even Ehrman, when push comes to shove, admits that we do have an accurate copy of the New Testament documents. Now your second question is, how do we know verbatim what Jesus said? We might not know verbatim what he said, because there are no quote marks in Greek, so we're not always sure exactly if it's a quote or if it is a paraphrase. Because Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic, yet the documents are written in Greek. But that's okay. You can communicate truth in different languages, and you don't have to be exact with what he said. You can get the gist of it. In fact, Jesus said, he was an itinerant preacher. He probably gave the same talks in several different places, right? I mean, if you followed me around, I go around to different campuses. I give the same presentations over and over again, but I might say things slightly differently in one place than another place. So maybe one guy heard it one way, another guy heard it another way. We have the gist of what Jesus said, and that's really all God wanted to tell us. Also, you might imagine that at those times, people had highly developed memories. They could memorize complete books. We can't even remember our phone number because we have all these devices that remember it all for us. So these people were an oral culture, and they memorized things quite well.
What I'm saying is, I guarantee you that the people who lived 2,000 years ago, who wrote this down on leather with, ink that they made out of plants, they didn't have all the data. They just didn't know. They just didn't.
They didn't have the germ theory
them,
of disease. I mean, they didn't even know that the earth spun around the sun. How are these people who understood the most about the cosmos more than scientists today?
They have made the decision that they will not listen to the Word of God. They have willfully rejected the authority of the Word of God, as the people of Noah's day did, and were flooded, that's what he says, and this world is being preserved for fire, and they're going to be judged one day. That's what Peter is saying.
At a time when it was believed that the earth sat on a large animal or on a giant, 1500 years before Christ, the Bible spoke of the earth's free float in space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Science didn't discover that the earth hangs on nothing until 1650, 3,000 years later. Encyclopedia Britannica documents that in 1845, a young doctor in Vienna named Dr. Agnes Semmelweis was horrified at the death rate of women who gave birth in hospitals. As many as 30% died after childbirth. Semmelweis noted that doctors would examine the bodies of patients who died, then, without washing their hands, they would go straight to the next ward and examine expectant mothers. This was their normal practice because the presence of microscopic diseases was unknown. Semmelweis insisted that doctors wash their hands before each examination. When they did that, the death rate immediately dropped down to 2%. Look now at the specific instructions the Bible gives to the Hebrew nation over 3,000 years ago when it comes to dealing with disease. And when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe his body in running water. Then he shall be clean. Nowadays, doctors wash their hands in running water. But it wasn't too long ago that they did so in a bowl of still water, leaving invisible germs on their hands. Leviticus 17 verse 11 says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement." Most of us don't think too much about the fact that a doctor can find out the health of our flesh by taking a sample of our blood. But the test can evaluate the health of our kidneys, our liver, thyroid, and heart. Among other things, the blood can reveal diseases and conditions such as cancer, AIDS, diabetes, anemia, and coronary heart disease. However, the great biological truth about blood revealing the health of our flesh wasn't fully comprehended until comparatively recent years. Up until 120 years ago, people were bled, and many died because of the practice. When George Washington became deathly sick, doctors thought that bloodletting would help him. But it didn't.
All told, his doctors took out about 80 ounces of blood over 12 hours, which is about 40% of an adult's blood volume.
Nowadays, we know that sick people need blood, so we give them transfusions. Rather than removing it, we replace it or replenish it, because blood gives life to the flesh. More than 1,000 years before Christ, the Bible stated this recently discovered biological truth: for the life of the flesh is in the blood. The scriptures tell us that the earth is round. Isaiah 40:22 says, "It is he who sits above the circle of the earth." The word translated circle is the Hebrew word chud, which is also translated circuit or compass, depending on the context. That is, it indicates something spherical, rounded or arched, not something that's flat or square. The book of Isaiah was written sometime between 740 and 680 BC. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, theorized that the earth was round by watching the masts of ships sink down over the horizon, and from his studies of the moon during an eclipse. He noted that the shadow of the earth on the moon revealed that the earth was curved. He could have saved himself a lot of study if he had read the Bible, which stated that fact 300 years earlier. It was another 2,000 years later, at a time when many in science believed that the earth was flat, that the scriptures inspired Christopher Columbus to sail around the world. Matthew Murray is considered the father of oceanography. He noticed the expression, "the paths of the sea," in Psalm 8 verse 8, written 2,800 years ago, and he said, "If God said there are paths in the sea, I'm going to find them." Murray then took God at his word and went looking for these paths, and we are indebted to his discovery of the warm and cold continental currents. His book on oceanography remains a basic text on the subject and is still used in universities. In the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 35, God asked Job a very strange question back in 1500 BC. He asked, "Can you send out lightnings that they may go and say to you, 'Here we are'?" This says that light can be sent and then manifest itself in speech. But did you know that all electromagnetic radiation, from radio waves to X-rays, travels at the speed of light? This is why we can have instantaneous wireless communication with someone on the other side of the earth. The fact that light could be sent and then manifest itself in speech wasn't discovered by science until 1864, 3,300 years later, when British scientist James Clerk Maxwell suggested that electricity and light waves were two forms of the same thing. Genesis chapter 2 verse 1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished." Everything is finished. Nature is complete. The brilliance of the light-giving sun is finished. The blue skies are finished. The clouds drop their rain, cleansing the air and giving life to the earth. The tall trees are finished, giving us oxygen to breathe. The rivers are finished, teeming with fish and filling our great oceans with water. The land is finished, yielding plants that give us food to eat. Nothing has a half-evolved eye or ear or leg or brain. It's all finished. from the animals to man to winged birds to the beauty and fragrance of a rose that blossoms to God's glory and for our pleasure. Nothing is evolving. Everything is finished, just as the Bible says. In Genesis chapter 6, God gave Noah the dimensions of the 1.5 million cubic foot ark he was to build. It's interesting to note that in 1993, a scientific study was conducted by the South Korean World-Class Ship Research Center, CRISCO. They compared 12 hulls of different shapes and discovered that no modern design outperformed the biblical model. The length of the ark was 6 times its width and 10 times its height. Many contemporary ships are built with similar proportions, although the length-to-breadth ratio is usually chosen with regard to the power required to move them through the water. The ark needed only to keep afloat. In Leviticus 13, verse 46, the Bible speaks of quarantine long before medical science discovered the importance of isolating those with infectious diseases. In 1490 BC, it gives instructions on what to do if someone has leprosy. He shall be unclean. All the days that he has the sore, he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Laws of quarantine were not instigated by modern man until the 17th century. The devastating Black Death of the 14th century took an estimated 70 million lives. This was because they failed to separate the sick from the healthy. When whole families fell ill, it was attributed to bad air. However, putting into practice the ordinances of quarantine laid out in Scripture would have saved millions of lives. In Job 40 verse 15, God himself speaks to Job of a creature he created called Behemoth. Some Bible commentators believe this creature is a hippopotamus, as does this particular commentator. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with you. He eats grass as an ox. Lo, his strength is at his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He who made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lies under the shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinks up a river. He hastens not. He trusts that he can draw up Jordan unto his mouth. He takes it with his eyes. His nose pierces through sneers. Science can only speculate as to why the dinosaur disappeared, but the answer may be in this passage of Scripture. As we have seen, some commentators think this is a reference to the hippopotamus. However, one of the characteristics of this massive animal was that it had a tail that is likened to a cedar, which is a very large tree. Clearly, the hippopotamus doesn't qualify. Here are the characteristics of this animal. It was the largest of all the creatures that God had made. It was plant-eating, that is, herbivorous. It had its strength in its hips, and a tail like a large tree. It had very strong bones, lived among the trees, drank massive amounts of water, and was not disturbed by a raging river. The Bible then says, "He that made him can make his sword approach unto him." It would seem that God had caused this, the largest of all the creatures he had made, to become extinct.
Today, countless scientific discoveries have confirmed the accuracy of the Bible. God's Word declared that in astronomy, stars innumerable, according to the Bible. Stars differ in glory. Stars follow a predictable pattern.
Can't be true because no one knows. Like, no one has died and given you no one's died with a VCR or a VHS tape recorder and come back with a look here, put this in the machine and play it. This is heaven. I've shown you.
It's important that we question the existence of Abraham Lincoln, because if he didn't exist, then this changes our perspective on history, slavery, and whether or not the United States should divide between the North and the South once again. As Richard Dawkins once wisely tweeted, the question is not how many millions believe it, it's, is it true? I've been inspired by several articles I've read online and by new atheists to question everything I've been told. I shouldn't believe someone existed just because someone else tells me it's true. And so I think we should apply this logic to Abraham Lincoln. First, let's examine this article from Time magazine, which says it's difficult to reconstruct the life of Lincoln because he was, quote, the most reticent and most secretive man that ever existed. Maybe that's because he never really existed at all. Let's take a look at what one of the earliest biographers had to say about Lincoln. He was one of the saddest men alive, and he was one of the jolliest men alive. Well, obviously, this is a contradiction. How can someone be the saddest man alive and the happiest man alive? How can you possibly believe someone existed based on texts that are riddled with contradictions? The same author then writes that Lincoln was the sum of his contradictions. So let's do the math. Lincoln was the happiest man alive, but he was also the saddest man alive. So if he's the sum of his contradictions, 1 plus -1 equals... Lincoln didn't exist, people. Lincoln is a myth. But wait, there's more. The only physical, tangible proof we have that Lincoln existed is text written by men from the Industrial Age. Now you tell me, why should I believe something written by men from the Industrial Age? For example, there are 5 copies of the Gettysburg Address that Lincoln allegedly gave. But if you look closely at the text, there are discrepancies in all of them. There are copies from Hay, Everett, Bancroft, Bliss, and Nicolay. Well, which copy is the right one? Honestly, though, all of these differences might explain the mythic development of the Lincoln story. First, Lincoln was president of the United States, then he was riding a bear, and now he's a vampire slayer. And while we're talking about vampires, Abraham Lincoln obviously is incompatible with science. If Abraham Lincoln exists, then vampires exist. But vampires don't exist, therefore Abraham Lincoln does not exist. Even then, there are plenty of parallels to the Lincoln story. Lincoln was a leader of the free world, but there was also Mithras, leader of Rome, Horus, leader of Egypt, Dionysus, leader of Thrace. They all lived in a White House. They were all visited by wise men. They ended slavery. They were all leaders, and you know what? They all didn't exist. Anyways, if you want my take on it, Abraham Lincoln was probably just a copycat. Let's take a look at Jefferson Davis, the first president of the Confederacy. Now let's take a look at Abraham Lincoln, president of the United States. The similarities are undeniable. Now don't get me wrong, I am not saying that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist. I'm just saying that I don't believe in him. Now remember, no one is born believing in Lincoln. They have to be taught, usually at a young age, that Lincoln existed and did all of these great things. But did he really do them? What are the chances that someone would be named Abraham Lincoln, have an iconic hat, have a beard, abolish slavery, invade the South, and be president of the United States? The likelihood of one person doing all of those things is really, 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 really small. Plus, Lincoln is known for abolishing slavery, so if Lincoln existed, why is there still slavery around the world? Look, I respect that you believe in Abraham Lincoln, I really do, but please stop shoving your beliefs down my throat, get him out of the classrooms, get him out of the government, and can you please take him off of the penny? If you believe in Abraham Lincoln, then the burden of proof is on you to prove he did exist, and that's a challenge. It was an eye-opening experience to apply the logic that a lot of new atheists use on other subjects other than Jesus, other than God, or other religions. My take on this is that if we keep questioning everything to the point that some people do, then how do we really know anything at all?
The first few seasons of Scooby-Doo followed a predictable pattern. In each episode, a ghost or a vampire or a monster would be terrorizing a mansion or a town or a carnival, and it would seem like there's something supernatural at work. But a few Scooby snacks and a corny song later, the mask would come off and the gang would find out that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for what once seemed mysterious. Richard Dawkins! After seeing this pattern repeated over and over again, those of us who grew up watching Scooby-Doo concluded that there's a natural explanation for everything. Then one day, the gang goes to Moonscar Island, aka Zombie Island. The odd thing about Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is that the ghosts and zombies turn out to be real. But Fred, after so many years of unmasking fake monsters, is too skeptical to accept that he's finally dealing with real monsters. At first, Fred's doubts are entirely warranted. When Lena tells him about the ghost pirate who haunts the island, Fred says,
"Well, no offense, Lena, but it's probably just some guy in an old pirate suit trying to scare off the local kids."
Then the ghost of Morgan Moonscar writes, "Get out" on the wall and levitates Velma, but Fred isn't impressed.
We've been levitated before, and there's always a magnet or wire somewhere.
Soon, the gang notices that they got video footage of the ghost while he was writing on the wall. Fred doesn't budge.
It's probably just a hologram of some guy in a pirate suit.
Fred even comes up with a motive after learning that there's a rumor of lost treasure on the island.
Aha! I knew it! It's some guy disguised as a pirate ghost trying to scare everyone off the island.
That's when things start to get awesome on Zombie Island. Shaggy and Scooby fall into a hole, exposing the bones of Captain Morgan Moonscar. Moonscar's ghost reunites with his skeleton, forming a zombie right in front of them. They make it back to the house and prepare for dinner, but the ghost of a soldier comes out of a mirror. Fred, however, is still convinced that it's all a hoax.
It's just guys in masks.
He even comes up with another possible motive.
Maybe there's oil under the island.
Oh my!
Meanwhile, dozens of pirate zombies and soldier zombies rise up. They're coming out of the water. They're coming out of the ground. Where's Rick Grimes when we need him? Daphne's the next best thing, so she channels her inner Ronda Rousey and judo flips a zombie, temporarily stunning him. She decides to put Fred's mask theory to the test, but soon realizes that it's not a mask. Does Fred agree with her? No! Fred not only thinks it's a mask, he thinks it's obviously a mask.
It's the fakest, cheesiest mask I've ever seen.
Fred takes over mask removal duties for Daphne, but the zombie's head comes off instead. The zombie then reattaches his own head. How's Fred going to explain this one?
It must be animatronic.
Animatronics, ladies and gentlemen. But zombies continue coming out of the water and out of the ground, and Daphne wonders how far Fred's willing to go with his animatronics explanation.
And I suppose they're all animatronic too?
Well, it is a possibility, Daph.
That's when Daphne drops an atomic truth bomb. Fred isn't really a skeptic.
You're not a skeptic, Fred. You're in denial.
Ouch. So, why has Fred moved from the skeptic category to the in denial category? Let's think about this. The term skeptic has a variety of meanings. In philosophy, it can refer to someone who denies the possibility of knowing anything, or to someone who denies the possibility of certain kinds of knowledge. But in its common usage, a skeptic is a person who says, "I only believe in something when there's good evidence for it." To be clear, there is a healthy kind of skepticism. There are good reasons for being careful about what you believe. If you believe anything anyone tells you, you're going to end up with a lot of false beliefs and a lot of contradictory beliefs. If you withhold belief until there's good evidence, you'll have a much more reliable and stable belief set. So the goal of a healthy skepticism is to avoid false beliefs and to get to true beliefs. But what happens when skepticism is used to avoid true beliefs and to stubbornly cling to false beliefs? Well, it's no longer any sort of meaningful skepticism, it's just denial. In Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, Fred's explanations become increasingly absurd as more and more evidence comes in. If Fred were really a skeptic, he would be skeptical not only of supernatural explanations, but also of his absurd attempts to explain away the evidence. Does my mask theory really account for the evidence here? Does my hologram theory or animatronics theory really explain the data? But he isn't skeptical of his absurd explanations. He's pretty dogmatic about them. Of course, this is a cartoon, and we don't believe in zombies. Why don't we believe in zombies? Because we have no evidence for them. We know where the zombie genre in films and books came from, and so on. But the point is that if you did have the sort of evidence Fred has in the cartoon, that would be a good time to rethink your beliefs about zombies. And Fred ultimately does change his mind.
Zombies? Real zombies? Real? Really real, Fred?
I hate to admit it, but they were.
Cartoons can teach us important lessons. The lesson to take from Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is that while we tend to think that our beliefs are all based on evidence, there's clearly more at work here than just evidence, because people react very differently to the same evidence. We adopt many of our beliefs long before we develop the ability to think about them critically. Even when we can respond critically, beliefs usually don't start off as hypotheses that we carefully evaluate before granting our assent. We just absorb them from the people around us, the books we read, the movies we watch. And the set of beliefs we end up with affects how we react to new ideas. If someone presents me with an idea that thoroughly contradicts some of my core beliefs, it's more difficult to take the idea seriously, whether there's good evidence for it or not, because adopting it would require such a massive change in what I already believe. For another person presented with the same idea and the same evidence, the idea will be much more believable as long as it coheres better with what the person already believes. So there's more to our beliefs than mere evidence. Our receptivity is influenced by what's already within us, both factors that we're aware of and factors we're not aware of. This is why some people look at the evidence for a hypothesis and regard it as conclusive proof, while others look at the same evidence and say that it's no evidence at all. The obvious problem here is that we can adopt a silly belief not because there's good evidence for it, but because we like it. And we can reject good evidence because it doesn't point where we want it to point. Zoinks! This brings us back to skepticism. Human beings have what we'll call a skeptometer, which controls our level of skepticism. And we can adjust our skeptometers. We can be more or less skeptical of various claims. As evidence comes in, if we don't like where the evidence points, we simply increase our level of skepticism. We can set our skeptometers so high that no amount of evidence will ever convince us of something we really don't want to believe. If an idea is attractive to us for some reason, we can lower our level of skepticism. We can set our skeptometers so low that any evidence is good enough to defend what we want to believe. Now, anyone can do this. Christians, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, conservatives, liberals. We can all adjust our levels of skepticism to preserve certain beliefs and to reject certain beliefs. This is why Fred dismisses evidence for zombies, while Shaggy and Scooby react quite differently. What's interesting is that most people who call themselves skeptics are really just doing what other people do. They only direct their skepticism towards things they don't want to believe. When they don't want to believe something, they simply set their skeptometers to maximum and start explaining away the evidence. When it's time to defend their own views, they lower their level of skepticism so that any argument for their own view is entirely successful, and anyone who disagrees with them must be stupid. Inconsistent skeptics do this constantly.
Well, constantly.
Let's look at an example. Recently, I debated Dr. Michael Shermer on the topic, does God exist? I like to go after people's strengths rather than their weaknesses. Dr. Shermer's PhD is in the history of science, mine's in philosophy. So in my opening statement, I based my entire argument on the history of science. That's his turf. He didn't give much of a response to my argument, but some interesting points about methodology came to the surface anyway. Dr. Shermer defended what he calls Shermer's last law. Shermer's last law is the claim that
any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God.
If aliens had technology far more advanced than our own, they could do things that would look like miracles to us. They might be able to cure diseases instantly, or regenerate limbs, or change the weather. These kinds of things would seem miraculous to human beings. So from our perspective, aliens who could do these kinds of things would be indistinguishable from God. Interestingly, Dr. Shermer raises the obvious follow-up question. If we saw something miraculous, how would we know that it's God and not aliens?
So my question is how would you know if you encountered God? That it wasn't just some super advanced ET capable of doing these amazing things.
But then he asks why God doesn't heal amputees.
Why is it God only seems to heal things that might have happened anyway? But humans never grow limbs. Never.
And here I detect a problem with his methodology. If he did exist, for you atheists, would you want to know it? Some of you might say yes, some of you might say no, but if you did want to know that God exists, wouldn't you need some sort of method to figure out if he exists? Something that could lead you to the truth about that? According to Dr. Shermer, there can be no such method, because anything God could possibly do, you could say, aliens did it, powerful aliens that are vastly beyond us. So it's built into the methodology that you could never know whether God exists or not. And if it's built into your methodology to never know the truth about something, I have to question the methodology. Dr. Shermer doesn't deal with the issue, so I ask him directly in the crossfire, what would count as evidence for God's existence? What, according to your worldview, which includes Shermer's last law, what could God possibly do to show that he exists? And if there's nothing that he can do to show that he exists, is this method really designed to get to the truth of the matter? At first, he jokes around.
A large cash deposit in my name in a Swiss bank.
How about a box of Scooby snacks?
I think 10 million would do it.
But then he gives his real answer.
But I'm after there is something that wouldn't happen otherwise, I suppose.
Something that wouldn't happen otherwise? I proceed to point out the obvious. Over and over again in this debate, it's been, hey, if God exists, then where's the evidence, and why can't we find the evidence, and hey, we should be skeptical and demand evidence and so on. But when we ask, what evidence could God possibly give in any possible world that would count as evidence for the existence of God, the answer is something that wouldn't happen otherwise. But something that wouldn't happen otherwise, according to Schirmer's last law, could be explained by aliens. So once again, we're left with a methodology that can't possibly investigate this matter. You can watch the full debate at your leisure, but we just don't get a solution to this problem. Dr. Schirmer wants evidence of God's existence, but given his methodology, nothing God could ever do would count as evidence that he exists. God could heal every amputee in the world, but it wouldn't be evidence for God's existence, because aliens could have done it.
Jinkies!
Now, when a person says, prove to me that statement X is true, but an examination of his methodology shows that he won't allow anything to count as evidence that statement X is true, how can we take that demand for proof seriously? This is why when atheists send me messages saying, prove to me that God exists, I almost never give them an argument for God's existence. Instead, I reply, I'd be happy to prove to you that God exists, but I don't want to send proof to someone who doesn't exist, so before I prove to you that God exists, prove to me that you exist. Then I dial my skeptometer up to 10, just like the atheist was about to do when he demanded proof for God's existence. So I get another message from the atheist saying, I obviously exist since I'm sending you these messages. But I'm a skeptic, so I ask, well, how do I know that someone's pet monkey isn't just slapping a keyboard? If something as sophisticated as DNA can form by chance, surely a monkey could type your messages by chance, especially with all of the misspelled words. Or maybe someone created an atheist message generator, which mindlessly sends out these messages and is even programmed with responses, all to waste the time of Christians. So we go back and forth, and eventually the atheist says, look, I'll buy a plane ticket and come see you. To which I reply, how would that be any evidence at all? Even if you came to see me, how would I know that I'm not dreaming? How would I know that I'm not in the Matrix? How would I know that I'm not a brain in a vat that's being controlled by some mad scientist? How would I know that powerful aliens aren't just tricking me into believing that you came to see me? And so we never actually get to a discussion of the evidence for God's existence, because when I use the atheist's methodology against him, he can't even prove his own existence.
This just gets better and better.
The point here is that we can always explain away evidence. In the first century, thousands of people saw Jesus perform miracles, and the leaders had him crucified. How could they explain away all those miracles? Easy. They said that Jesus performed miracles by the power of demons, and that would explain the miracles, wouldn't it? If Jesus were walking among us today, people would explain away his miracles by appealing to illusion or to deception, or, if all else fails, to powerful aliens. But the atheists who are watching are saying, no, if God performed a miracle, we'd believe in him. If God healed an amputee, we'd convert right now. Seriously? You have no problem with an entire universe exploding out of nowhere, but an arm growing would make you a believer? You don't think it's at all strange that non-living matter rearranged itself to form life, but if a living arm grew out of a living body, you'd never dream of ignoring or explaining away the evidence? My atheist friends, by constantly demanding evidence while proving over and over again that evidence is completely meaningless to you and that your methodology is designed to help you avoid conclusions that you don't like, you're not showing us that there's no evidence for God's existence. All you're showing us is that
You're in denial.
And you might have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for us meddling Christians.
And even if you use the Old Testament, people say, well, that's the Old Testament. We go by the New Testament, which is even more preposterous, because the New Testament was written by Constantine and a bunch of bishops, and men decided what to leave in and what to take out. They decided. Of course.
One of the common misconceptions that floats around out there is that the Bible is the result of an act of the church, if you will, and that the church sort of created the Bible and brought it into existence, and so in some sense then the church is kind of over the Bible. And that idea is widespread, and it has a number of different manifestations. One which I hear a lot is this idea that the Bible was created at a church council. Usually it's the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century that's mentioned, and usually the shadowy figure of Constantine is put there as someone just working his plan from the background. And so he supposedly manipulates things and gets the Bible he wants and creates the sort of first Bible for the church that everyone's agreed on, and then suddenly you have the Bible as the result of the decisions of men in the 4th century. And so it creates this idea that the Bible is this human invention. It's entirely an accident of history. It's something that you can't really put much stock in because it's all political anyway. This is the sort of idea that you get from it. But that whole narrative has a number of holes and problems in it. One of the problems, of course, just on a factual level, is the Council of Nicaea didn't really address the New Testament canon at all. It was more concerned with Christology and how to articulate the divinity of Jesus. And so it really has nothing to do with that. The other mistake with that is this idea that it was not until the 4th century that Christians really thought about what books are in their Bibles. And we can see the emergence of the canon all the way back in the 2nd century. So the idea that a later church council created the Bible just is out of sync with the chronology. Christians already had a Bible long before that. Not only an Old Testament that functioned, but a core collection of New Testament books that functioned very early. Yes, some of the edges needed to be refined and solidified, but the core was there from long before any vote or any church council. So it's always important for people to just remember that. It's not that the Bible was created by men, but it was sort of more organically brought up within the body of the church and recognized for what it was. Part of the conception in people's minds is that these documents were written in the 1st century just sort of as friendly advice to the church. And it wasn't until the 4th century that the church decided, these are great books. I say that we make these scripture and sort of infuse authority into them. I think we need to rethink that too. When we look at the New Testament authors, particularly the apostles like Paul, who are explicitly identifying themselves as apostles, you see a real sense of authority when they write. They know they're not writing just casual letters that maybe later would accrue a scriptural status over time. But there seems to be a sense in which Paul understood him to be standing and speaking with the authority of Christ even then, and his audience seemed to recognize that as well. So when you ask the question of where the authority came from, it can't be a later vote or a later church council. It seems to be sort of innately built in to the documents themselves. So I think these two angles can round out that whole discussion of how to think about that issue of church versus Bible.
It's worth remembering the apostles' words at the end of 1 Corinthians 14. If anybody is questioning what Paul is writing, let him acknowledge that what Paul is saying is the Lord's command.
Many people in our world have a wrong understanding of the Council of Nicaea. The reason people have the wrong idea is because they've gotten their information principally from that one inestimable authority, Dan Brown, author of the Da Vinci Code. So the Council of Nicaea figures in the Da Vinci Code, and virtually everything that Dan Brown says about it is wrong. So I tell my students at Chapel Hill that if they want to know about the history of the Middle Ages, the way to learn about that is not to watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And if you want to know about the history of early Christianity, the way to do that is not to read Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So according to Dan Brown, the Council of Nicaea, he says all sorts of things about the Council of Nicaea. Everything he says about it is virtually everything is wrong. There's a common view, for example, that he popularized it, but people had this view before he came along, that the Council of Nicaea is when Christians decided which books would be in the New Testament. Where did you finally get a canon of the New Testament? Who decided those books? Oh, it was at the Council of Nicaea. Wrong! They didn't even talk about it. It wasn't an issue at the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with the formation of the New Testament canon. The other thing in Dan Brown's book is that what Dan Brown indicates is that at the Council of Nicaea, they were deciding whether Jesus was the Son of God or not, and they took a vote, and it was a very close vote. So Jesus barely made it in as the Son of God. The reality is the Council of Nicaea was not a council to decide whether Jesus was the Son of God. Everybody at the Council of Nicaea agreed Jesus was the Son of God. The question was, in what sense is he the Son of God? Is he the Son of God who was made by God in eternity past to create the world, or who's a subordinate deity, or is he the Son of God who's actually equal with God who existed forever? Which is it? This was the debate at the Council of Nicaea. A vote was taken. There were over 300 bishops from around the world who came together for this council. This is the first of 7 ecumenical councils of the early Christianity. In the early years, there were 7 church-wide councils that made decisions about theology and practical matters for Christianity, and this is the first, the Council of Nicaea. This council was actually called by the Roman Emperor Constantine. So he called together all these bishops, they came to the city of Nicaea, and they debated, and they took a vote, but it wasn't a close vote. In the end, after these 300 bishops got together, basically, it was just 2 or 3 guys who refused to sign off on the statement that resulted. Arius lost the debate. Arius lost the debate.
Does this mean there's no God? Absolutely not. Does this mean that I have the answers that you don't have? Of course not. I'm just saying, people are full of shit, and that story sucks. It's that simple.
Well, I think what we do too much of is confusing 2 questions. One of which is there a God, without defining what God is?
Right.
And the other of which is there any reason to believe in a particular faith or a particular denomination, to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever?
Well, I think we could break it down even further than that.
Yeah.
People don't know. And anyone who says they know is
right.
not telling the truth.
Nobody goes to hell for not believing in Jesus. Hallelujah, right? You know why people go to hell? Because of their sin.
Okay.
Those people in those tribes in the deepest, darkest jungles are sinning against the God they know exists. That's why we send missionaries, because they're going to hell for their sin against the God they know exists. If they didn't know, sending missionaries would be the worst thing we could do for them. We should have wall building teams to build walls around these communities. But the Bible says that everybody knows that God exists and are without excuse for their sin against him. Even people that profess an other God know the true God. Because they're not going to be able to say, oh, I thought it was Allah. No, guess I was wrong. Say, no, you know the true God that exists, even you. You're a cop in this one cop town. You're the only cop, right? Every Friday night you get a call from the local pub. Bob the drunk is drunk again. So you go down to the local pub, sure enough, Bob the town drunk, he's drunk again. You pick him up, you pour him into your cruiser. And you take him to your station to sleep it off overnight. It's just a small station, you know, good enough for one person. You put him in there to sleep it off Friday night. And as is your standard, because, you know, it's a small town, you take the cruiser home for the night. Take it home to your wife, you know, and you go back Saturday morning because he's sobered up to let him out. On the way back to the station, you stop at the dry cleaner because he had some uniforms in there that were cleaned and pressed. You hang them in the back of your cruiser. Now you go to the station, Bob is sobered up. You get him to sign the paperwork, you release him for the day. By the Saturday morning, you're all the way back at the station, so you go upstairs to do some paperwork. And you're working on that paperwork till around noon, and you figure, oh, it's time to go. You go downstairs, you go outside, and your cruiser is missing. But it's such a small town, you figure, oh, it's probably those Baker boys, those rascals, they're going to bring it back. That's how small this town is, and you're not worried about it. You don't call it in. You happen to have a bicycle at the station because you're an avid cyclist. And you figure, I'll take my bike home today. So you take off your uniform, you put on your yellow spandex outfit, your helmet with a little mirror on it, you know. You get on your 10-speed bike and you start going down the highway. And you hear a siren. Getting pulled over by a cruiser. Your cruiser. Out steps Bob, wearing your neatly cleaned and pressed uniform. Comes up to you and says, Mister, you are speeding.
I know with 100% certainty that God doesn't exist. I know that with exactly the same certainty that I know that Santa Claus doesn't exist. Now, if Santa Claus lands on my roof, I'll believe. Do I think that's going to happen? No.
But you see the contradiction, though, when you say that you can be wrong about everything you claim to know, and then you say you can know things for certain. Now, if he says that he can be certain about things, then I would ask him how he can be certain about things. He would have to employ his senses and reasoning, and I'd ask him how he knows they are valid. And if he could be wrong about everything he claims to know, he can't know that they are valid. And that's the problem. Mister, you are speeding. Now, folks, that is an apologetic situation. How do some people answer? Throw down their bicycle, run into the bush. I don't like dealing with the police. I don't like arguing with people. Other people, oh man, nice day, isn't it? Do you want to come to our pizza social Friday night? Or they give evidence. Look, there's no way I could have been speeding. The speed on this road is 55 miles an hour. The land speed record for this type of bicycle is 45 miles an hour. Look at my skinny legs. There's no way I could have been speeding on that bicycle. Look at the gearing ratio. This bike can't do 55 miles an hour. I happen to know the land speed record for this type of bicycle on a flat surface with this much headwind is only 45 miles an hour. And the speed on this road is 55. I happen to know a lot about the radar in that cruiser. Can't even pick up bicycles. There's not enough metal in them. And you win the argument. What does Bob say? Oh man, you're right. You couldn't have been speeding. I'm sorry. Have a nice day. Gets back in your cruiser, drives off. What's the problem? Say, I'm sorry, you're not a cop. I'm not giving you that authority. And somebody accuses you of vicious circularity. What are they doing? And now we're back to the one cop town, the person standing there in your uniform next to your cruiser. They're bringing a logical argument against you. They're accusing you of circularity. Who owns logic? Jesus Christ. They can't bring a logical argument against me. They say your argument is circular? What's wrong with that? Where do you get logic that forbids circularity in your worldview? Well, as Christians, we know things by and through revelation from God. You see, I can use my senses and reasoning to come to knowledge because I know that I'm created in the image of God. I know that He's given me the ability to know things through my senses and reasoning. People will say, well, you need your senses to read Scripture. Yeah. Well, I say, can't God use my sense and reasoning to reveal things to me through Scripture? Sure He can. And if you can't know anything, you have no objection to that. These people know that God exists. That's what Romans 1 says, but they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They're suppressing the truth. What do you have to have in order to suppress the truth? You have to have the truth. What I want you to do is imagine a town called Lotto Town. There's 10,000 people in this town. And every day they have a lottery, and everybody in this town gets a ticket. Imagine on day one, a certain person wins the lottery. Imagine on day 2, same person wins the lottery. Imagine on day 3, the same person wins the lottery. At this point, the atheist says, I'd say something's up. Something's been rigged. I said, oh, you're a riggist. But when the sun comes up every day, you're an a-riggist. You think it just happens that way. How come in the lottery example, you're a riggist, but in the world, you're an a-riggist? You don't believe in God who's controlling the universe. See, in order to do science, you're borrowing from the Christian worldview, because you can't even do science unless you start with God. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Who owns science? Who owns logic? Who owns morality? Jesus Christ. We don't give them to the unbelievers so they can argue against our worldview.
We've got to stop with this cheap trick of you could be wrong. It's old, and we need to move on. You're disrespecting the other hosts.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you. Get off the stage.
So, I mean, basically they were saying, hey, Sai, you can't use that argument. Stop, basically this is a powerful weapon. And they're saying, put down your powerful weapon, put down your atomic bomb to our worldview. And Sai's going,
you go into a discussion, they have a pea shooter, you bring a gun, and they say, no, you can't use that gun. That gun is a nuisance. I don't like that gun. So what do most Christians do? They throw it away. Say, okay. Or do they give it to the unbelievers?
Yes.
Say, here, you can have knowledge, you can have truth, you can have logic, you can have all these things that belong to Jesus Christ, and you can use them to argue against Jesus Christ. I will not allow that.
Yeah.
I will not allow the unbeliever to use the weapons of Jesus Christ to argue against the Lord that I adore. Now, if you argue with an unbeliever, assuming that they can know things without God, you've lost before you started. See, it's like getting in the unbeliever's airplane. You can talk about whatever you want. You can even win the argument, but you're going to the unbeliever's destination. Don't get on that plane. Don't give up your authority.
Why did he want to do that? Well, the problem is it's not a cheap trick. The problem is you got somebody who's denied knowledge and now wants to make knowledge claims. You've got somebody that's asking you, what's your ultimate authority? And you're saying, I don't have one.
He takes old, discredited arguments, that he reads from fiction novels, and mindlessly regurgitates them as fact. This is what atheists do. Bill Maher does it, Neil deGrasse Tyson does it, Richard Dawkins does it, and Joe Rogan does it. They sit there and act like a bunch of pseudo-intellectuals saying, oh, if you believe in the Bible, if you believe in Jesus, you're just unintelligent. You're not as enlightened as we are.
If you believe in preposterous notions, like there's a guy who came back to life, he turns water into wine, he walks on water, if you believe that, you're not intelligent.
And then in the next breath, they'll sit there and talk about aliens.
Travis Walton, this guy.
I've seen. I've watched it.
His
Yeah,
bobblehead.
yeah, I've watched
He's
it.
very compelling in his descriptions of his encounter with these beings.
Do you think Travis and Bob Lazar and all these guys that have extraordinary claim believe what they are telling you? I don't know if what they believe is true, but what do you think they believe what they are telling you in a way that they're not lying, they're telling the truth of what they're believing?
I can't tell for certain, but I believe Bob Lazar. I believe what he's saying is true. But my communication with him, I don't know if he was telling me the truth, but he didn't seem deceptive. And he's a brilliant guy. If you believe that, you're not intelligent.
The guy loves talking about aliens. You see, the existence of God, the almighty, all-powerful creator of the universe, and the death, burial, and resurrection of his son, Jesus Christ, even though there's historical evidence to prove it, even though there's scientific evidence to prove creation, that's just too fantastical for Joe. Christianity, too much. But aliens? Little green men? See, he'll talk about that all day. But if you ever bring up the Bible, he'll question whether or not you even have a brain. I mean, it's just unbelievable. As I was saying, these are nothing more than pseudo-intellectuals. They're prideful, arrogant, and in the end, it'll be their egos that prevent them from getting saved. All of Joe Rogan's atheistic arguments are totally discredited. He gets them from books and science fiction movies. The guy thinks he's smart. He's really not. He's a dude that gets behind a microphone and interviews some famous people once in a while. Big deal. If you're going to deny the Bible, at the very least, construct an argument that isn't nonsensical or grounded in total fiction. The only way for him to pretend like the Bible is just ridiculousness and it's just mythical, fantastical stuff that some guy made up to control people is by fabricating lies. It's what he has to do. He doesn't have the truth on his side. And so he'll make stuff up about Constantine writing the New Testament. He'll say if you believe in Jesus, you're an idiot. He'll say it's impossible that Jesus rose from the dead. Not understanding the reason he was able to do that is because he's God in the flesh.